The strictures of the compliance function mean that the idea that like AI is going to take your job, it's not really something that's that realistic in compliance. We at Hadrius, we certainly don't believe that. Compliance requires AI be something that works for you, not take your place. And I think that dynamic is what I want to get into today. So I think there's a progression of automation. There's this progression from something that helps you speed up your work and makes manual work more efficient to then it becomes like a co-pilot as automation gets better. And that's what Hadrius builds, and that's kind of where compliance software is today. There is a third level of automation, which is basically solving something, and it becomes like a building block. This is where technology disappears and no one thinks about the function anymore. It's the same way that no one thinks about elevator operators anymore. Like you just press the button and you go to the floor you want. And I think there's a real doubt that compliance is ever going to get to that final level. It's always probably going to stay in some tier of technology will be assisting human judgment, but it is beyond what it was before. So, for example, in a previous generation, like automation was like you could have like lexicon-based marketing reviews. So you'd have like a piece of software that would tell you if you didn't want certain terminology to appear in your archived comms or your marketing. And now you can say, actually, I want you to read this and understand what they're saying. And I want you to fact check claims that you make. And so it's still automation, but the robot is acting more agentically now. Will it ever get to the point where it's solved? How close can we get to that? Is that desirable? That's what we're talking about today. One thing I want to call out very quickly is that certainly regulators have insisted that humans stay in the loop. Both FINRA and the SEC, which are the two regulators that are our product, those two rule books we serve, what they've said about AI and about using these tools has very much focused on saying that this needs to serve human oversight. There needs to be a supervisor. There needs to be some sort of monitor for these technologies. And so with that, I'm going to start throwing it to the panel. Broadly, what I want to discuss is which compliance work can move safely to AI and which are always going to need human judgment. I'm interested in speaking about what regulators are going to permit and what their expectations are in this area. And then finally, I want to talk about how CCOs can keep humans that are in the loop engaged in this oversight so they don't just click yes on whatever the machine says. So with that, I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to send my first question to Mr. Keshet. So I think one of the things that's interesting about the question of automating compliance is that it's very subjective, and two people can look at the same thing and decide different things. If in a world of full automation, theoretically, you'd have like a standard rule book. Do you think that it would be preferable to have like a standard contextual read on a document, or do you think it's good that there's this subjectivity in the compliance office?
That's a great question. Thank you. I definitely think that subjectivity is extremely important. I'll give an example. Actually, one of the products that Hadrius have that we use here at IEQ, we use Hadrius AI service to help us with marketing reviews. But there's you gave an example of certain words, like there's certain words that sure will trigger some sort of a review, but it does not mean that I will decide that we're not going to include that. For example, like if we have a sentence in one of our marketing material that says, we work with prestigious fund managers, it will trigger the word prestigious. I may decide that this is something that will rise to the level that I should change it. But I think that there's going to be other CCOs that may say, actually, it's not. It's pretty objective. Like if I work with BlackRock and Fortress and Goldman Sachs of the world, they are prestigious. That they mean it's good, they're good. That's a different story, but they are prestigious. So there's no black and white. There's almost no black and white at all in anything that we do in compliance, other than do not trade with material non-public information. So I think absolutely we need to keep the balance of the machine helping us and making us more efficient, more targeted, and learning from us, But I don't see a world where I would just send a marketing piece to any sort of agent, AI tool or whatnot, and be like, review it, submit it to whoever that is. I'm never going to look at it. Not going to happen.
Because you wouldn't trust it?
I wouldn't trust it. I also think that do you have, and I think we have back and forth. Like none of us working back in a vacuum. So for example, if I just said that I actually said like change the word prestigious and I changed it to something else, like well known, I don't know. The person who authored that marketing piece, or whether it's part of our marketing team, BD, or even one of our producers, they may want to push back, and you need to have that dialogue. That's what we do. Compliance does not work in a vacuum. Compliance is a business partner that supports and work with the other departments. And for that to work, we can't have robots speak to each other. We need to have human beings doing that.
Maybe I'll add to that. One of the risk decisions that a CCO or a compliance function would need to make in a marketing material context is what kind of backup you have for an assertion. So if your piece is making a statement, somebody has to decide, can I back that statement? And that's going to be a human judgment about how thick that file is, how credible the proof statement is. How if the exam team asks me to back up my statement, how comfortable am I that I can do that? And that's really, really difficult to automate that decision. And I would think as a CCO or a compliance, number one, you'd want to have some involvement in that decision. But two, you'd want to have some sense just holistically about maybe how close to the line your overall practices were being if you looked at 100 pieces and they all had pretty sketchy claims that you may be, okay, that maybe makes you a little less comfortable if you say, I've looked at 100 and 99 are nailed down in this one. Okay, maybe a little bit, and we're willing to take the risk that we can defend that. Maybe it's not as tight as the other ones, but we still think it's credible enough, right? Those are decisions that are really, really hard to automate, and ultimately the CCO is the one that has to sit in front of an SEC examiner and defend the quality of the record.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's just been said by my co-panelists. The way that I think about it and we look at it here is that I think there's an element of risk, and how it falls, how the piece falls within a sort of a risk rating, if you think about it. And what I mean by that example, and I think we were just both the other two co-panelists were talking about marketing material. Well, clearly that's a higher risk piece of material that's subject to very specific requirements. And by the way, I'm not sure how, from a risk appetite perspective, how you would build that into AI. It's kind of interesting to think about, but we're very much into doing risk appetites and inherent risk versus residual risk. I would put it another way, or two ways I would add to that. The first is it almost feels like you're saying, okay, we now have a very powerful Excel spreadsheet, and somehow Microsoft has figured out a way to publish that. I wouldn't be comfortable with that without guardrails around it, for sure. The other thing is that I also think that as we move towards more agentic, I view it as someone who needs to be supervised. That shouldn't be a concept that's and it's something perhaps, but at the end of the day, there needs to be supervision over output, just like there is for people who are natural persons, to use a legal term, right? Real people need to be supervised. I don't know how you get around not supervising. And then where the rubber hits the road is, okay, so does that mean, is it before release? Does that mean after the release, a combination, sampling, that sort of thing? So I think there are a lot of elements to that to think about how the firm gets comfortable and oversees all of those different pieces.
And Mark, it's a great point, and let me just put a finer point on that. The supervision isn't an abstract concept, but it's one of the ways that the CCO gets knowledge about what degree of understanding the authors of individual pieces have. And that back and forth is an opportunity for knowledge. It's an opportunity for training and feedback. It's an opportunity for you to get a sense of who a new joiner is or how they do business. So not all staff are homogenous, and that back and forth is a way for a CCO to get knowledge of how the firm is operating. The other thing I'll throw in, Mark, you talked about risk, and I think it's critical. But when we think of risk, it's not just risk of a violation, it's also risk of being second guessed or the risk of having difficulty explaining our thought process. And that's, again, a little more of a nuanced view of risk instead of, is it binary 1-0, either it failed or it passed. That's a much more nuanced sense of a CCO and kind of managing risk and what you're comfortable with.
One thing
What
that
do
I do, oh, sorry, go ahead. Lynn.
Sorry,
I was
no,
about to
continue.
say one thing that I would definitely welcome more in terms of the automation and the AI is, I will use the example right now of a marketing piece. So the way it works for our team, they have to create a Salesforce record with the marketing piece. Then I will take it, kind of move it to the Hadrius platform. Whatever suggestion they come, and then I accept them or don't accept them. I add my own other comments to it and send it back. I would love to have a system that bypass the whole idea of having to upload anything, or it's automatically go and then appears on my screen to give my my review of it. I would love to have that. And I think that's actually one of the biggest issues that I have with AI today is that I feel that every day I get 5,000 emails to 5,000 products, and they're all very niche instead of a more comprehensive thing that combines this solution with the AML solution, with the form solution, with whatnot. So
There is elsewhere in the business side, the appearance, at least, of judgment. I mean, if you look at like underwriting decisions that are made by algorithms, what do you think is different about compliance where this is a domain where judgment is not supposed to be exercised in the same way it might be elsewhere in a financial firm?
I think our role that's what our role is, quite frankly. So if you the whole idea of being a chief compliance officer and the fact that we rely on, one general law from 1940, which obviously has a lot of interpretations, action, blah, blah, but there's so much room for interpretation. By nature, everything that we do is subjective. Our experience and knowledge come into place. I think, as I said earlier, the fact that we are part of the business and understand the business and know how to work with other teams. When you do, but I will say this, like personally, I think you mentioned about like investments. I don't know if I would have been personally, as a person, invest in a quant shop or a robo shop. I wouldn't. But there are people who will do that sometimes because they will feel that it's probably maybe cheaper for them to invest, and it cuts a little bit of the overhead of the manager, so they pay less in fees, whatnot. But I wouldn't actually rely on that completely either. But again, it's because I'm wired that way. I'm wired to the point that everything is for us is trust but verify, or not trust but regardless of verify, and that's the nature of our job.
Yeah, and I would suggest that maybe I'd challenge the presumption of the question a little bit, that there is no judgment. Okay, I understand why it was asked that way, but I agree with Lior. I think it's a thread that goes throughout, and probably more like a cable that goes throughout our career in terms of making those decisions. And that comes from everything from how do you set the system up, right? More programmatically, what it checks for, what it uses, how it updates it. Are there errors made? Right? And then a decision as to, at the end of the day, what I think the gist of the question was, well, does that mean they can go out, without pre-review is kind of how I heard you ask the question, because it has I challenge no judgment. I think perhaps less judgment, but still judgment that's required.
Yeah, I'll go with the and rather than or. There are some places where having a binary objective look makes a ton of sense. So, for example, if you're trying to apply a sanctions list to the potential investments that you're making on behalf of clients, that has a much higher degree of risk, and you're probably looking at individual tickers or CUSIPs or issuers. And you don't want to have a ton of judgment there. You want to have as kind of objective as you can, because at some point you need to comply with the law. And there's also reputational risk there, and you want it to be a repeatable process. So things like that, or things like that are portfolio compliance guidelines, where you want your a fund to be invested in certain things or to abstain from certain things. You want some degree of objectivity there so it can be administered consistently and using the benefit of technology. There's other places where you might combine them. So for example, if we're talking about doing a review on a potential client coming in, you might have an objective piece of that that's looking to see if they're on a naughty list somewhere. But you also might have a subjective piece that say, we've never done business with these folks before. We don't really know them. We've had an intro meeting, we had a call, we've looked them up on the interwebs. They seem like they're okay, but to be fair, we don't know them and we weren't referred by somebody that we trust. At some point, that's a business call about whether you're willing to take that risk. So part of the CCO's job is to say, I'm not here to necessarily take the business risk for the firm, but I am here to talk about what kind of risk there is, maybe from being second guessed on a KYC perspective, and what additional means we might make to mitigate that risk or to strengthen our file a little bit to show that we've been thoughtful in our diligence and our judgment in making those decisions. So I'm very much of the objective and subjective are complements and ands rather than ors.
And I will add to it too that I'm being cynical, but like sometimes we have to ask ourselves to a specific task that we're doing it so we can show the SEC that we did it, or we really care about the content. And I'll give you a great example. Like I think the other day I was shown how a vendor we work with, which archive text, now I can use an AI agent. Essentially, I will upload a bunch of our policies, like a compliance manual, code of ethics, etc. And then when he searches text and doing surveillance, it will actually try to match it specifically with whatever is in the policy. So if my policy said that you cannot give a gift without pre-clearance and they see a text that says, let me take you to the Dodgers game, it will flag it. So, but the question that I'm saying is like, this is the AI. If I can use it as like saying, okay, I can check the box here, SEC, I'm doing this. I upload my policies, I'm looking at my text. Or do I care to enhance it? Do I really want to care about checking the output, making the right decisions? Like the same text of saying, let me take you to a Dodgers game could have been to a friend that I happened to get the text from, not necessarily in the context of a non-pre-cleared gift. So, and I think because what we do and the way we take our jobs is not as a check the box, but is really protecting our companies and protecting our clients, we absolutely need to have that piece reviewing whatever output we have and whatever processes we have.
Leonard, maybe another way that I can answer that question is I don't think any of us have the confidence or arrogance to think that we can possibly anticipate every single fact pattern or permutation that might arise in the future and then code accordingly. So I think our general approach is to anticipate, identify risks, think about, as Mark said, net and gross risk. Those kind of things are a mental model. But at some point, life is not predictable, and you are going to get a fact pattern that you didn't expect that's going to require some decision-making authority, some judgment authority. You're going to have the ability to make those decisions and make those assessments. At the same time, you also need to give your staff some ability to be adults and use good judgment for them as well. If you're going to try to write procedures that are so detailed that your staff can't possibly breathe without double checking a 300-page compliance manual, no one does any business all day except double checking the compliance manual. That's not effective. That's not productive. That's not constructive. So I think you have to start with a little bit of the humility to say we think about identifying the risks, and we think about trying to mitigate those risks and put our people in a position to succeed. But we're also not arrogant enough to think that we can have a crystal ball that can perfectly anticipate and mitigate everything in advance.
Of course, and we all know the limitation of AI primarily is that it's always backwards looking because it's trained on data. And so, to your point, there's never going to be a day in the future where nothing new happens. When we talk about assuming risk, it makes me think of the idea of accountability and how how accountability differs from transparency and decision making. They're related, and I think automated systems can help with transparency. One of the things we prioritize is making sure that when the AI does something, it shows up as transparently as possible. It shows you what it thought it was doing. But there's a difference between that and actually taking responsibility for something. Where do you folks think that there is an opportunity for intelligent automation? Like, what's a function that you would give over to it soonest?
So MAI has been very much a acquisitive registered investment advisor. And one of the things that has been suggested to use is there's massive due diligence process that goes through with lots and lots of documents. So one of the things that's been suggested is that there's a way of, because I think that, the particular AI platform that we use is really good at looking for patterns and looking at data and coming up. You have to be very careful in how you prompt it, but then once you get that prompt, and I really like the notion of the fact that you also don't want to get in a situation where you just keep re-prompting the same question. So maybe something happened between the prior due diligence and this due diligence, right? So I'll give you another example. I think we heard about the 300-page compliance manual. One of the things that we do, because we will have partners and employees who come over, is that we literally will map the policies and procedures for what they currently have and what the acquiring firm has. And that helps on a couple points, and where it's really salient for a lot of folks is a code of ethics. It sort of, it cues off the notion that there's that subjectivity and other firms deal with other things in a different way. Example is that perhaps one firm would view everybody as an access person. That may make sense for scope and scale, but if you have a firm that's 100 times that size, or 200 or 300 times, it creates a different set of risk. So what really is I think that some people found very helpful is having the ability to do comparative work. That doesn't mean that you trust it. God forbid. Maybe I'm the more conservative guy, but I want to look and see. And I've had issues. I probably everyone who's listening to this or watching this, who's used it to an extent. Good catch, Mark. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean good catch? And I also tell the story sometimes that when I first started using it, I said, my gosh, this thing is dumb. And then I learned how important the proper prompting is. And that's very, very, it's a generative process too, is that you'll learn things, it learns things. And of course, the output, which I'm very always mindful of, is that it's an internal review process. There's a lot of checking that gets done, sourcing that needs to be done, where it came from, section 3 of the Code of Ethics versus section 8 of the acquiring firm's Code of Ethics, how it's different and why it matters. So that's been I think it's been really institutionalized is the ability to do things that comparing compliance manuals and Code of Ethics, which may have previously taken 4 days. And that's not at 300, unfortunately. I wish I'd say that that's an outlier, not so much. And then going through and getting the work product. The real work begins, though, is then when you look at that output, what do you do with that? How do you test it? How do you communicate it? And how do you memorialize that as part of the review process?
Yeah, Leonard, I'm gonna build on that a little bit because I think what Mark's describing is a great illustration. We talk about quote unquote AI. That word means different things to different people in the application. So there are some people that think of AI as like this big top-down, cross-functional, all singing, all dancing applications that you've got big project work groups that are looking at, workflow and cybersecurity and data mining and all that kind of stuff. And those things might exist and there might be good reasons to do those kind of things. But I think what Mark's illustrating is the real power is more of the retail individual by individual basis that's saying, how can I use this tool just to make my individual job better? Instead of spending a day on this, if I can ask AI to give me a push in the right direction and spend 15 minutes on it, that just saves me hours. But those are micro decisions that depend on each individual person realizing that that tool can help them. And so the firm isn't going to necessarily have a strategic master plan that says, here's all the use cases that we envision, and here's all the things that you can do, and you're authorized, now go use it. It's very much the opposite. It's much more, we don't know your job as well as you do. Here's a tool, tinker with it. Don't rely on it. As Mark said, use healthy skepticism, but the more you use it, the better you get at it. But you're the subject matter expert in your own job, and you know where to apply it that will help you. And what that help might be could differ by person. In some cases, it could just make their job more efficient. In some cases, it could make them more effective if they're trying to summarize a regulation or summarize an SEC release. If you can have that summary popped up in 2 pages rather than reading 300 to start, maybe that helps, kind of a Cliff Notes kind of thing. But you don't get that right away, and you don't get that without working at it and tinkering with it and failing, frankly. But those are the individual micro examples on a person by person basis that I think we're seeing with our members are really starting to, the ones that are getting traction. It's really coming from the bottom up instead of a master plan from the top down.
Yeah, I think you mentioned.
No, go on, Leo.
Oh, sorry. I think you mentioned automation, and I think there is a product I think that we're using. We onboarded it about a month and a half ago, which is honestly a game changer for us. So we are a wealth management firm, so we don't really have our own funds. We just manage thousands of clients' individual portfolios. We have numerous meetings with them where we discuss things we're going to do with respect to the investment, etc. And one problem that we always had to do with accountability, making sure that if we tell the client that we will send something, it's going to be sent. If we say something, if we have a date, it's going to happen. We onboarded a tool, it's called Nevis, and no, I don't own percentage in them. But essentially, it does not transcribe, but it does summarize meetings we have with clients and create a to-do list. The to-do list would say, Leord to send this kind of fund presentation or whatever that is to the client. And then it connects to my email and my calendar, and it will check to see that I do it. And if I don't do it, it will send me a note saying, you said you're going to email so-and-so this thing. You haven't done that. And I have to say, as somebody that I feel like half of my 22 years of career is spent in follow-up with people, that is extremely helpful, an extremely helpful tool. It has its own risk with it, so I'm not trying to minimize it at all, but it's unbelievably efficient and encourage accountability by people. So sorry, I cut you off. Apologies.
And no worries. Thank you. I have a couple reactions about sort of the rollout of AI. I think that it's sort of our peers in the industry, many will do it by having it at the bottom up. And I think one of the challenges is that I think it can be, if it's handled strategically, it can be a great value adder to the firm. So as I think I've said in the past, is that AI success is not the number of licenses or seats you have. It's what the output is. And there are different ways of measuring that output. And I think there's an incredible array of trust, confidence, willing to learn. That sort of, and it's actually, I've experienced it at some points. It's almost like a K, one of those K-shaped things where you have people who have been doing it a long time, are really early adopters. And that's not to say that younger generations don't adopt it, but we have a very strong internship program. And one of the things that we hear from them is one of the reasons why they don't adopt it is because their universities frown on it so much. In fact, they shouldn't be using it. And that creates its own level of, because I agree with what was said before as well. I think it's experimentation. I think it's failing. And it's having sort of modeled the tool for what your needs are. And that goes everything from asking it as saying something along the lines like, you are the CCO. You've been asked by the CFO X. Please advise the pros and cons. And then the other piece, that I sort of stumbled upon, 2 other things. I know this is a little bit sort of a digression, but number one is I also use it sometimes to model a prompt. So that gets really, really interesting when you're saying, wait a minute, what? You actually say, what would you need to answer this question? And then I get into sort of this circular dialogue is like, why the heck can't the thing do it itself? Why do I have to do it? Especially if it's like, I need this, I need that. And the other piece that I find really effective is a concept called red team. And remember, I said you're the CCO of a mid-sized firm, produce blah, 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 and then ask it to say, from the perspective of an SEC examiner and general counsel, what are the pros and cons and what are the suggested edits of the output? And I think there's some tendency amongst many to view AI. I think as the learning is getting accelerating, they viewed it as almost, I'm going to show my age now, Ask Jeeves or the Google machine, right? It's almost like doing a Google search, which I think is really hilarious because I now found when I do a Google search, I'm treating it like AI, which is, it goes the other way. I go, what am I asking this for? And of course, it defaults to the Gemini and I'm okay. But I do think at the end of the day, it really is a key strategic pillar that needs to be thought of enterprise-wide. Again, depending on the size of the firm, I get it, could be 3 guys, 3 gals, but at a broader, I think it's a competitive advantage that people put themselves at a significant disadvantage if they don't think about it from that perspective, from an enterprise perspective.
So Mark, one of the consequences of that is as tools are more accessible to more people, it's not like the work goes away. In fact, the work might expand because now you have more capability to do more things. So you might have previously had the idea, hey, it would be great if I could do something, but no idea how to do that. Well, now you might have the ability to do that, especially without having to go to an IT department and get them to think about what custom bespoke thing they can build, or like if you can pull your agentic rabbit out of the hat and you can code it yourself, then all of a sudden maybe you're doing something, but that something may be new that might mitigate risk. That might be a great thing, but all of a sudden you now have something that you've added to your portfolio. So when we talk about why is the tech or why is AI might make somebody more productive, it's because some of these tools might actually expand your wingspan and the ability to touch more things more effectively, as opposed to wrapping up at 2:00 and saying, "Oh, I'm done," because the quantity of work is fixed. The quantity of work is bottomless. You can spend all day if you had it, but this allows you to cover more things. It's kind of like we used to do sampling, looking at email review. Once we got better tools, we didn't have to do sampling as much because the AI was able to encapsulate a much larger data set and cover more risk in that sense.
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. The first is I think there was a study maybe a decade ago, maybe more, about how to solve congestion. So I live part-time in Houston, which if anyone's ever been there, literally there's a highway that looks like it's 30 lanes on both sides. And so the question is, well, why don't we just add more lanes, right? Well, besides the fact that there's limitations on eminent domain and everything else, is that there's actually a study that concluded that by adding more lanes to get to the Katy or get to an outlying, no longer, but get to a farther reach, actually increases congestion because then there's more building. So it has real, in my mind, what you said had real resonance with that, is that I'd love to see if I could figure out that 4-hour thing like that Ferris book a couple of years ago. I never have, because what happens is that the lanes keep getting built and you get wider and wider and wider. And obviously then you do triage. It's like, what's the highest risk? What do we need to do?
And I want to just jump in and say that, yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I don't think anyone as someone who works at like a company that's selling AI, the idea that this is going to vastly reduce, I mean, we do more work than ever, and we're in office. So, we very intimately understand the limits of what the technology can do. It is important to mention that a lot of the discussion about AI we're having is about like generative AI, and the conversation about governing generative AI in the enterprise is very interesting because it can go off the rails. And a lot of the compliance products like us are attempting to be as deterministic as possible. So that basically the AI it's a robot that can read, and you're trying to confine it in as tight of crucible as possible. So it can, let's say, take your compliance manual, implement it. If a trade gets flagged as front running, it has the ability to compare it with something in the employee's U4 and that type of thing, and then it serves it up and makes it transparent. And so it is sort of what I think of it as internally is like this is the something that can allow compliance to solve some of the if someone is using generative AI to approximate the job of the CCO, or anywhere else in the firm. This is something they need to keep up. I want to switch very briefly to a regulatory consideration. So, and then I want to take questions in a few moments. But so, what do you guys see as the future of an examiner accepting? Let's say, I think all of you are former attorneys, if I'm not mistaken. What are the chances of an examination becoming more of like when you go to get your emissions test, when they check to make sure that they check the system and make sure that it's, versus a sort of more adversarial relationship? Do you foresee a regulator ever accepting the output of an automated system as proof of compliance?
Kind of like what we said before as CCOs. I think there's a fair amount of trust but verify. One thing that would, I think, make an examiner uncomfortable is having a black box and not being able to substantiate what the conclusions, where they came from. It was also said, I think, I don't know, it was SIFMA or another meeting, that examination staff was, the sage from the stage, so to speak, but they were actually saying that they're using AI in their examination program, which I think is interesting. And then the other piece I'd add to that, which I think is really interesting, is that they're actually, I don't know whether it's a sweep or not, Kevin, maybe you could answer that, but I've seen exemplars of DOE lists that are very heavily focused on AI right now. So I'd suggest that people get their hands on one of those to sort of help you understand what they may ask, with the caveat, of course, these things are always subject to, interpretation and expansion or contraction.
But it's important to
go ahead.
It is important to also understand, though, that as we were saying, the SEC have AI capabilities too, which means that the amount of materials that they can actually review and find issues with is much larger than it used to be. Marketing material is a great example. Like last time that I had the SEC coming, I said, look, we have, I don't even know, 10,000 marketing pieces. Let me give you a few examples from each type of them. That's what they reviewed. That's what they commented on. Shockingly, they didn't comment at all, but regardless, like I gave them a sample. There's no reason for that right now. They can ask me to dump thousands of documents, and they will have AI try to spot stuff. And then, it depends how much they want to review the output that they get from AI to figure out whether it's worth mentioning or not. But so I think that's what we need to remember, that we are more efficient and we are quote unquote more powerful, but so is the SEC.
And in some respects, AI is nothing more than the most recent chapter in a story that stretches back several years. It's the SEC has invested a lot of money and effort into resources to put analytical tools in the hands of individual examiners. Your example was right. I mean, I remember going back a few years ago, when you would have a debate back and forth with an examiner about how much trade blotter data you could really provide and how much they could literally ingest. And you'd talk in terms of, weeks, but at some point it was no longer that discussion anymore. It was just, we'll take everything you've got. And it wasn't just trade data, it was holdings. It was like if you have it, we can vacuum it. But that all existed before AI came on the scene. So the SEC was already trying to find more ways to slice and dice data and trade blotters and look for anomalies. AI just makes it more efficient, more effective, and just like we're trying to do, and we're looking through our own lenses, we're trying to figure out what we can do for both efficiency and effectiveness. So I think that's absolutely a thing in terms of both the SEC exam side and their enforcement side. Anytime they're looking for an anomaly, a tech tool helps them get there. But the other question, or the other thing that I'll say, Leonard, is I do think that the SEC is still asking for two questions. One, just tell us, just describe how you're thinking about your own tools and your own governance. They're not necessarily going to come in and say, thou shalt have a committee that looks like this, or we're going to tell you that your, pre-approval regime needs to look like that. They just want to see if you have a credible story to tell, that you've thought through the issues and you've taken a rule of reason approach at addressing them. If they come in and you just give them the deer in the headlights look, yeah, they're not going to be pleased. But they're not coming in as a management consultant. They're coming in to try to get some sense of, are you taking it seriously and being thoughtful about it? Having said that, the thing that they are still focusing on, and they have from the beginning, I think will be perennial, is the classic do what you say what you do. If you're putting in your ADV or in your marketing materials that we use AI to do this or to run money this way or to do that, you have to be able to show that you actually do it. And so I do think that AI washing is probably less of a risk, because I think everybody's gotten the message, but that's really, really low-hanging fruit for an SEC examiner, because they can pull your ADV from the website. They can look at your marketing materials on your website. Like, they can do analysis before they even show up in your office, just to cross-reference and say, hey, there's inconsistencies across your firm. And then when they get engaged in your exam and they can ingest materials like your compliance manual, they can put all those into the magic box. And those are the things that they can use AI. Please compare horizontally across these things, including like requests for proposal responses, marketing materials, ADV, like all those kind of things. The AI gives them an easier way to compare horizontally across your firm. So one of the things that I do when I give CCOs advice is, if you're trying to think about what kinds of things to do to mitigate risk, very much as Mark said, put your brain in the position of what would an examiner compare and look for inconsistencies, and they would hold you to your own standards of, are you doing what you're saying and saying what you're doing? That's low-hanging fruit. And that principle is not new with AI. AI is given it maybe a little more sharp focus, but those principles aren't new.
Yeah, just to build on that, I mean, if you look at what the examinations are focusing on, it's essentially really the traditional stuff that we have to do as the compliance team, just with an AI flavor. It's the vendor due diligence, it's a data security, it's do what you say and say what you do. Like those are just the stuff that we're supposed to do anyway, and that my experience with them in terms of what they focus on. Show us you have real governance. Show us you do reviews with respect to hallucination and outputs. I mean, those type of things that we will do, honestly, quite frequently anyway, with anything that leaves your, whether it's email or text or whatnot that we send clients. So I don't think there's anything revolutionary in terms of what the SEC does in what they're focusing on right now in their SEC exams. It's just a little more, to use a, I don't know if it's the right word, it's just a sexy topic, the AI, but the functions are the same.
Leonard, maybe we can tie this back to where we started with the human in the loop. I would say that the closer the AI gets to directly interfacing with communicating with clients or delivering advice to clients, the higher that is on the risk spectrum. And the more the SEC is going to be skeptical and ask you questions, and they're going to want to know, how do you know that what is coming out is what should be coming out? And human in the loop is often one of the ways that you answer that question.
Although I have had the pleasure of having competing AI results and saying, so here I got this from ChatGPT, right? And you go to another one and say, criticize this. And it's a pretty astounding exercise. If you haven't ever done it before, you really should. Because what I find really interesting is that it also gets, look, I think a lot of we heard compare a lot. Clearly it's really good at that generally. But when there are more subjective things, I think it's really interesting to see, this platform said this platform said that. And I'm not suggesting that every time one does that. Obviously, the more material it is, the more sound you want it to be. But that comparative process, again, we're using that word compare, between the output of two different engines or AI platforms can really lead to some interesting results. And how you fashion your prompts in the future.
And,
You know,
and
it makes
so
me think
this
of,
likely will be one of the new fronts of working through AI tools is this struggle between if it's deterministic, you can map it out, test it, get some comfort that the results are going to be as you expect, and you can run 100 tests and validate that 100 results come through. When you have something that's probabilistic, that math changes. And so how comfortable do you get that the output is going to be reliable enough to use, all those kind of things. And you're doing this in your work life at the same time, all of your customers and all of your staff are using it in their personal lives kind of in parallel, and they're getting a lot more comfortable, not only just using it, but they're making their own risk decisions about how much they can rely on it when they get burned by it, whatever. So it's not just that the firm is coming up with a fancy quant risk system that sits in a bubble and it's a firm only type of a tool. It's your staff is kind of going through their own R&D on a personal level at the same time in parallel.
yeah, the I just want to again make a plug for the deterministic nature of what the compliance AI is trying to do. And it's funny because, we all know that a large language model inherently is a little bit stochastic. You're not going to be sure. Like, for example, we have a feature that fact checks if it detects a factual claim or an MNPI claim in comms, it will attempt to fact check that. It might do differently each time, but the key is that in the structure of the tool, does it confine that to something so that it's kind of replicable? It reminds me of how in like Major League Baseball right now they've gone to the automated balls and strike system, and they don't make the claim that this camera system that tells whether the ball's in the strike zone or not. They don't say that it's perfect. They say that it's kind of another, less arbitrary judge. But then you call on it only at certain times, and so that in that way it makes this sort of inherently any decision is going to be error prone, but it tries to confine it to when it's called upon. And I think that kind of reminds me of the way that we're building compliance software. We're running close to time. I wonder if I could just close by asking Kevin. So you're a part of SIFMA, and I'm wondering what is the conversations that you're having with regulators about your members' use of automation, and are you hearing anything back from regulators about their concerns about it?
I would say that the flavor that we're getting from regulators in general is an acknowledgement that AI is here and it's part and parcel of how today's world works, and you can't ignore it. So you need to deal with it. And whether dealing with it means incorporating as part of the service you provide, whether it means working with the risks of your staff using it for their internal workflow, can mean different things to different shops. But I think the sense from the SEC is it's here. We need to deal with it. It's not something that you can isolate, segregate, or completely ignore. At the same time, I do think that this SEC in particular views itself as pro-innovation. They are kind of back to the crystal ball problem. They know that they're not going to be able to anticipate every possible permutation of how it might be used, and that's putting a little bit of the pressure back on the CCOs and the compliance functions to be that adult in the room, to wave the caution flag and say, hey, on behalf of the fiduciary duty here, we need to be cautious about this, or here's the risk, or this one is moving closer to something that feels like it needs some additional supervision. Back to the objective, subjective. I think that's where the SEC, in the most productive sense, views the compliance function as a partner, because they can't be everywhere, and they would like to know that there is, again, kind of that adult in the room that has capital gains fiduciary duty in the back of their mind and says, if I was sitting in the shoes of a client, what would I expect? What would I want to receive? What would make me comfortable at night? And so I do think there's going to be a continued pressure around the compliance function. And then, Lennon, to your point, that does make the CCO kind of a bit of a quasi-amateur tech person. And so you're not, I'm not saying that everybody needs to become a coder overnight, but at least have enough familiarity and enough sense to be able to do some issue identification and ask some ask some questions. And I think that's the kind of diligence and interest the SEC is going to have in the near term, at least.
Yeah, and I think you have to know how to play with some of those tools in order to do your job as a compliance officer. Like if I don't understand Claude at all, how can I audit some of the uses that are being done via Claude at IEQ? I definitely did introductory stuff for almost any sort of system that we have to use AI, and I'm also a user for all of them, although half of them have nothing to do with compliance, just so I can see how it works, play with it, make sure that I do whatever checks that I want to do.
You almost have to assign yourself work. You have to assign yourself brain knowledge to be in a position to do your job, because without a fundamental baseline of knowledge, you don't know what questions to ask. You won't identify the issues. You may not have all the answers, but at least you're in a position to identify that there's a question.
I think that's a great note to leave it on. We are at time, so I'm gonna have to cut it off there. But I want to thank you three for joining me, Mr. Keshet, Mr. Ehrlich, and Mr. Happ. And thank the viewers for joining. We're going to be doing another session, Hadrius and World Salon, next Wednesday. That is another look at what the heart of compliance could be if there was more space to be doing more strategic thinking. But for now, I'm going to cut it there. And thank you to World Salon for having us. And
Thank you
to our panelists. We'll see you next time.
very much.
Thank you.